Hey, howdy, hey, kids! I'm your old friend Spunkle Bingus, and welcome to Spunkle Bingus's wonderful wonderland, where only good things happen. We're gonna have a good time as we hang out and check out some wholesome, family-friendly activities. So buckle up and get ready for me, Spunkle Bingus, to take you on a journey that you won't forget. Of all the animals. You've seen this kind of thing before, right? A creepy horror thing on the internet, with hints that there's more story behind the scenes if you're willing to dig for it. This is something that's exploded in the last decade, after the release of Five Nights at Freddy's. Not just the idea of indie mascot horror, but the concept of an ARG. I assume if you're watching this, you already know what an ARG is, but just in case, ARG stands for Alternate Reality Game. It's when a piece of media hides little details, codes, and clues in the background for the audience to piece together and discover some kind of secret story. If you've ever seen any episode of Game Theory, you have a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. This sounds like it's right up my alley, right? I mean, that's my whole brand, taking on sprawling, mysterious, lore-heavy stories so that I can untangle and explain them. That's exactly what an ARG is. And my last video was about the ARGs in Gravity Falls. On paper, this should be my favorite thing ever. Why in the world am I making a video called The Problem with ARGs? The truth is, I have a really hard time getting invested in the vast majority of ARGs. There are reasons for that come down to personal preference, but also, over the years, I've seen trends and tropes within ARGs as a genre that worry me. Attitudes of the audience and creators that might be a little unhealthy. I've been trying to put my thoughts together on this for a long time, and I finally feel like I know how to explain how I feel. So let me tell you why I think ARGs, or the current state of the genre, has some issues worth talking about. Let me cover a little more about what an ARG is and what it involves, so that the uninitiated can better understand what it's like being a part of something like this. And I want to go over the appeal of things like this, reasons why ARGs are cool and fun. Because I'm not saying ARGs are all bad, or even mostly bad. You might be playing a video game or watching a movie or TV show, and notice that the story is pretty empty, with a lot of details that seem to be straight up missing. And then there are lots of little moments where something weird will flash by with no explanation and make you go, what was that? Your curiosity piqued, you're drawn in more and more as you come across various tiny optional background details that give you morsels of lore that start adding up to something bigger. Some of these details might be in code, with a string of gibberish letters or numbers that, if you're smart enough, can be translated to uncover more information. You've ceased being merely an audience member and have become a detective, sifting through information and evidence to put this puzzle together. Adding to the whole experience is the element of kayfabe. The reason it's called Alternate Reality Game is because a lot of ARGs present themselves as if they're real things in the real world that you can investigate. They make you feel like you're diving down a real-life rabbit hole, uncovering some lost secret. Before long, you found your way into source codes, hidden game levels, and secret supplemental websites archiving everything you can find. And soon, you turn to the internet to see what other fans have found. At which point, you quickly find dozens or hundreds of people all working in tandem to crack the codes with you. Putting together the story becomes a collaborative effort as you become part of the ARG's fandom community. You meet tons of insanely passionate people swapping information and theories, and when your collective efforts result in a breakthrough, it's electric. ARGs are a new storytelling medium for the internet age. They're built for you to put wild amounts of energy and investment into, while linking up with like-minded people all over the world. When they hit, they really hit. But this, as a concept, is pretty niche. Most people don't even know what an ARG is. There are a few substantial barriers to entry that make them tough to get into. Mainly, ARGs are hard. They're work. You're not just sitting around watching or playing something, you're doing research. Most people don't find that fun. Or even if someone does, they might not know how. This stuff is complicated. So if you're not an experienced codebreaker, or you don't know how to make an audio spectrogram, or there's a special key piece of lore on a now defunct website that you didn't know existed, you'll probably just end up quitting or having to turn to the internet for all the answers. And that's really the first reason that I personally tend to bounce off most ARGs. I'm not clever enough to figure out all these puzzles, and I don't really mean that in a self-depreciating way. No one person is smart enough to solve everything on their own. That's by design. These are meant to be collaborations, make people work together. If an ARG is too simple, the online hive mind cracks it in a day, so it's gotta be hard. But the practical reality of that is that the overwhelming majority of fans don't actually do any puzzle solving. Maybe there are some people out there who stay off the internet and commit to doing all of it on their own, but that's not the norm. More likely, you stumble across a few of the early hooks and solve some of the simple stuff, but then you get stuck. And at that point, why bother beating your head against them when somebody else online already cracked it and they can just tell you the answer? In practice, being an ARG fan is less about being a detective and more about sitting around on social media, waiting for someone else to do the detecting. And even if you do try solving stuff yourself, the speed that the top fans move makes it all feel a little pointless. When I was working on the Gravity Falls video, I saw post after post on Reddit and Discord about some excited fans saying, "Look at this thing I found, do people know about this?" Only for all the veterans to leave exasperated comments to the effect of, "Yeah, we know, you're the 5th person this week to make a post like this." I'm never going to be the first person to solve anything. There's always somebody smarter, faster, and more dedicated who gets to it before I can. A typical ARG is an exercise where a tiny fraction of superfans does all the work, and the rest of us are just along for the ride. And along the ride for what exactly? In an ARG, you uncover a hidden story. But is that story ever any good? That's what I'd want to see. A cool narrative, a well-constructed plot that comes together after you find all the pieces. The few ARGs that I've actually enjoyed are ones that are tied to or expand on existing stories and franchises that I already like Gravity Falls, Cloverfield, and Heroes. But a lot of ARG-focused media have stories that are pretty threadbare. They mostly boil down to guy murders people, corporation does a bad thing and covers it up, and supernatural thing is involved somehow. When or if you gather all the information, it usually culminates in a dry timeline of events full of actions of bland, one-dimensional characters. Like William Afton, the purple guy, might be the most developed character in the most popular ARG of all time, appearing in dozens of installments. And he has no personality beyond hates people and likes to murder. I read a joke somewhere about how if you watch Memento in chronological order, it's a really mediocre revenge thriller. ARGs are compelling because of the work you put in to understand it, not because the plot is inherently interesting. I think that's also why almost every ARG is a horror story. You're uncovering things that are twisted and disturbing, and that alone makes your discoveries feel important, regardless of if they're narratively satisfying. Okay, let me stop whining for a minute. All of this is why I personally get turned off to ARGs. None of it is inherently bad. These things don't need a super deep story. The act of puzzle solving is supposed to be its own reward, and the only reason there's a story at all is to give the answers to the puzzles shape and meaning. And to the point of not everyone participating in the solving themselves, there are lots of people who aren't smart enough to figure stuff out, but enjoy being confused, picking apart what they do understand, and excitedly listening to somebody else break it down for them. There's a whole YouTube ecosystem built around creators making theory and explainer videos for this exact kind of audience member. That's where most of my knowledge about ARGs comes from in the first place. Watching people passionately talk about all the stuff they figured out and getting general audiences up to speed. I just did exactly that for Gravity Falls a few weeks ago. There's nothing wrong with engaging with ARGs this way. If that were all I had to say, I wouldn't have made this video. What has me concerned are the ways that these audiences and systems could be taken advantage of. The thing that got me started down this train of thought is this question that popped into my head one day, years ago. Is Five Nights at Freddy's ever gonna end? There was a time where I had a pretty solid understanding of FNaF lore, back when there were only 4 games and a couple of books. I watched Game Theory and a few other channels that broke it down, and had fun with it for a little while. And then the franchise kept going, for a decade. Every new game added new characters, new lore, new stories. And with every new installment, rabid fans tore them apart looking for the ways it fit into what had already been established, or how it upended what had been established. What struck me was that, 1, in the early days, there was a broad consensus of what the story was, with the community putting together the clues to make a pretty straightforward timeline. But these days, nobody seems to agree on how the story fits together. Videos argue with each other about what it all means and what goes where and what's canon, because the games don't give you enough information to be sure about anything. Even after finding all the pieces, it's all still too vague to make a complete picture. And 2, no, it's never going to end. FNaF is a money-making machine that'll keep churning out games until the heat death of the universe, because there will always be fans ready to devour them to find out more of the lore. But how is that possible? The FNaF story, and all ARGs, are mysteries, right? It's supposed to be building towards something, a discovery and reveal that makes it all make sense. But there's no way that's what's happening here. Scott Cawthon definitely didn't plan out all this lore ahead of time. It's clear that the story is just being made up as it goes along, which is a concept I've spent a ton of time complaining about on this channel. They had this initial mystery of the purple guy and the missing kids, and then kept tacking stuff onto it. So what we have here is a puzzle that will never have a solution, and a story that will never make sense, and a huge audience of people who will never stop trying to solve it, that'll go on forever. That all makes me wonder, does modern FNaF have a story it wants to tell? Or is it just creating more lore out of obligation because that's the only reason people have stuck around for this long? I talk constantly about the power of mystery in fiction. The easiest way to hook an audience and make them go along with your story is to present them with a mystery. Human brains want resolution, and their curiosity will compel them to keep reading, watching, playing just to find answers. J.J. Abrams' entire career is built on exploiting this like a cheat code, and his Mystery Box TED Talk is him giving the entire game away.
I find myself drawn to infinite possibility and that sense of potential, and I realize that mystery is the catalyst for imagination. What are stories but mystery boxes? There's a fundamental question. In TV, the first act is called the teaser. It's literally the teaser. It's the big question. So you're drawn into it. And then, of course, there's another question, and it goes on and on. And they're in there. You don't hear anything they're saying. You can't hear a word, but it's the most romantic date ever, and you love it because you don't hear it.
Just put mysteries in your stories. People will eat up any old junk you put in front of them as long as you promise them more info is coming. And the best part, you don't even have to have actual answers. You can just make up whatever. ARGs as a concept are built in a way that cultivates a rabid, passionate fan base. With all the effort it requires for you to solve everything, you can't not care. An ARG is hard work, from both the creator and audience sides. It takes a lot of effort to create as well as solve well-crafted and satisfying mysteries. And well, what if some creators aren't putting in the effort? It only takes a couple of minutes to write up a coded message and flash it for 1 frame, and that's all it takes to get a fanbase going nuts wondering what it means. There's a line from a Bo Burnham song that I think about a lot.
I just hope I don't get more from this than you do.
To oversimplify, he's talking about being an artist, and how crushing it would be for you to pour your heart and soul into something, only to find that the audience doesn't connect with it. That would sting extra hard if you were an ARG creator. I mean, could you imagine creating a huge, sprawling, hidden story, and then nobody cares? Or nobody even notices? But the reverse can also happen. An audience could get really passionate about solving an ARG, while the creator of that ARG doesn't care at all. In short, here's my concern. I think there may be some ARGs out there that were only made to pander to our love of mystery solving. To exploit our desire to find answers to things, the creators whipped up a lazy, half-baked puzzle and seeded a few hidden clues to jumpstart a rabid fanbase, generate a lot of free marketing, and cover up just how shallow and low effort their franchise actually is. There's no way of knowing whether a creator is doing this, and I would never accuse any specific ARG unless it was really obvious. Like Hello Neighbor suddenly shoehorning in a bunch of lore as soon as they notice people getting excited about it. Speaking of, there's a lot of overlap between what I'm talking about and this game theory video that I highly recommend. But that's kind of the whole problem. You don't know if that's what a creator is doing, because if someone were doing this, it would be so easy to hide. All you'd have to do is build the ARG with an incomplete story and tell the fanbase, you just haven't found all the clues yet, or more information will be revealed in the next installment. No one would ever know that they were being strung along because it never needs to end. Unlike a TV show like Lost, where eventually the chickens come home to roost and people realize the mystery box was empty, an ARG franchise can go on forever with new clues and hints at new lore to make an ever-expanding, incomplete puzzle that will never be finished. By doing this, you'd create an army of loyal fans who keep spreading the word about how cool and mysterious your franchise is, and keep buying all your products. Have you ever noticed how many indie horror franchises have tons of books now? That's because when you have all this hidden lore, it creates a captive audience who has to consume every scrap of canon there is to make sure they're not missing anything. Am I just being paranoid? Is this just an appeal to ignorance argument from a hater? Maybe. And if you have more direct experience with ARGs than I do, please do share your thoughts in the comments, because I'd love to be reassured that I'm getting worked up over nothing. But I've seen too many weird little things in the ARG space that make me go, huh. When FNaF Security Breach came out, reviewers tore it to shreds. It was a buggy, broken game with uninspired mechanics and lacking in anything actually scary for a horror game. But the theorist community barely ever mentioned that. At least anecdotally, all I ever saw were people digging into the secrets and the lore. The fact that the game was barely playable was an afterthought, or a joke. I don't think the bugginess is because Steel Wool Studios didn't care, but what this does show is that it doesn't matter if your product is good or works. As long as you have ARG elements and the promise of a mystery, people will buy. This isn't a one-off thing. I already mentioned how Hello Neighbor pretty much stopped developing their video game just to dedicate all their time to making lore for their video game. With each Cloverfield movie, the ARG elements got less and less detailed, but they were still there because the first movie's ARG is what the most dedicated fans remember it for. And then there's Poppy Playtime, which released its first chapter that was only half an hour long with barely any actual gameplay, but the studio was ready with books, merch, and NFTs to capitalize on people talking about it. I don't really mean to say that there are tons of ARGs out there actively doing all this. I just want to point out that there are conditions here that are ripe for exploitation. I don't really have a call to action about all this, other than, I guess, if you find yourself getting bored or frustrated by an ARG, don't be afraid to walk away. Don't let the sunk cost fallacy keep you engaging with something you don't really care about. As for me personally, I still hold out hope that I'll find ARGs that I like. Gravity Falls is alright and all, but even that falls victim to the issue of sprawling multimedia installments that become increasingly esoteric as it goes on. You know what I'd love to see? An ARG that's all contained within one piece of media, with enough story presented front and center for you to get invested before you start digging into the mysteries, that's feasible for one single person to solve on their own, and that has a clear ending and a complete narrative. That'd be really neat, and if anyone knows of something like that, I'd love to hear about it. In the meantime though, I'll stick with what I do best. Breaking down long-form mystery TV where all the clues are there in the show for me to find myself. Unless Alex Hirsch updates the Book of Bill website again.
Well, not every story has to have significance, you know? Sometimes a story is just a story. If you try to read into every little thing and find meaning in everything anyone says, you'll just drive yourself crazy.